The envelope felt flimsy and cheap in my hands, so different from the heavy, linen stock paper my financial statements used to arrive on. For 20 years since my husband, Henry, passed and left me the fruits of his lifetime of work, my son, David, had managed everything. "Don't you worry about a thing, Mom," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "I've got it all under control. You just enjoy your retirement." And I had. I lived in the same comfortable, if modest, home Henry and I had bought together. I drove a reliable but 10-year-old sedan. I thought we were being prudent, careful. I trusted him implicitly, until my printer broke. I went to David's home office to use his. He was out, but his computer was on. A spreadsheet was open. Out of idle curiosity, I glanced at it. The rows and columns blurred, but a few numbers snagged my attention. Huge transfers, all outgoing, all from accounts I vaguely recognized as mine, all to a shell company with a name I didn't know. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, sickening rhythm. I fumbled with his filing cabinet, my fingers trembling, until I found what I was looking for: a locked box where I knew he kept important documents. The key was taped underneath the drawer. A mother knows her son's hiding places. Inside, I found my reality, neatly organized and utterly shattered: the true bank statements. The deeds to properties I supposedly still owned, now transferred to his name. The life insurance policies cashed out. He hadn't been managing my money, he had been systematically pillaging it. The modest portfolio he described to me was a lie. He had left me with nothing but a pittance in a checking account and the rusty old sedan, while he lived in a mansion and drove a car that cost more than my first house. The betrayal was a physical pain, a cold knife twisting in my gut. I saw the little boy I'd read bedtime stories to, the man I'd proudly watched graduate at the top of his class. That man was gone, replaced by a greedy, duplicitous stranger. I didn't confront him. Anger was a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, a cold, crystalline calm settled over me. He thought he had left me with nothing, but he was wrong. He had forgotten about Nana Rose. Nana Rose was my paternal grandmother, a formidable woman who'd outlived 3 husbands and buried 2 world wars. Right before she died, when I was just a girl, she'd pressed a heavy, old gold coin into my hand. "For a rainy day, my dear," she'd whispered. "Never tell a soul, not even your husband." It was a 1907 Double Eagle, ultra-high relief, one of the rarest coins in the world. For decades, it had sat in a safety deposit box, a forgotten relic I'd never had the heart to sell. Until now, I sold it at a private auction for a sum that made my head spin. The money was mine, and mine alone. David, in his arrogant oversight, had forgotten it existed. But cash wasn't revenge. Revenge was a lesson. A very specific, humiliating lesson. David was the proud CEO of Apex Dynamics, a mid-sized tech firm he loved to boast about at family dinners. It was his pride, his identity, the symbol of his self-made success, a success built on my stolen money. I had my lawyers create a discreet shell corporation. Then, I did something David would never expect. I went to work. I dyed my gray hair a mousy brown, bought a pair of nondescript glasses from the pharmacy, and dressed in clothes from a thrift store. I became Marge, a sweet, slightly forgetful older woman looking for part-time work as a cleaning lady. Apex Dynamics was hiring for their night janitorial staff. The interview was a joke. The supervisor, a kind young man, took pity on me. I got the job. For 3 months, I emptied David's trash. I wiped down his enormous glass desk. I vacuumed the plush carpet in his corner office. I watched him. I learned his routines, his arrogance, the way he treated his employees like disposable assets. I saw the company's waste, its inefficiencies, its low employee morale. I gathered intelligence, not with spy gadgets, but with a sponge and a trash bag. The final piece of the puzzle came from the break room. David was celebrating a huge win, a merger that would make him millions. He was over-leveraged, pouring every liquid asset he had into the deal. The company was vulnerable. It was time. I gave my notice at my cleaning job. The next morning, as David strode into his office feeling invincible, he found a single envelope on his desk. No return address. Inside was a simple note: "Check your shareholder registry. Then check your security footage from last night. Then meet your new majority owner in the lobby." I waited for him downstairs, dressed once again in the elegant, expensive clothes that were the true me. I watched his face on the security monitor in my phone as he first read the note with confusion, then checked his computer, his face paling with dawning horror. He saw the name of my shell corporation, holding 51% of his company's stock, bought up quietly on the open market during his merger frenzy. Then he pulled up the janitorial footage from the night before and saw Marge looking directly into the camera, giving a small, cold wave. He stormed into the lobby, his face a mask of purple rage and utter confusion. You, he spat, drawing the attention of his entire staff. What is this? What have you done? Hello, David, I said, my voice calm and clear, echoing in the suddenly silent lobby. I've decided to take a more hands-on approach with my investments, and my first executive decision is a staffing one. I turned to the stunned security guard at the front desk. Please escort Mr. Evans from the building. He is no longer the CEO. However, I said, turning back to my son, whose jaw was hanging open, we do have an opening on the night janitorial staff. The pay is minimum wage, but the benefits include a profound lesson in humility. The position is yours if you want it. You'll report to me. You're insane. I'll fight this. You'll do nothing, I interrupted, my voice dropping to an icy whisper only he could hear. Because if you do, every investor, every news outlet will receive a detailed file of your financial transactions over the last 20 years. The embezzlement, the fraud. You'll lose more than your company, David. You'll lose your freedom. The choice is yours, CEO of a prison block or janitor of this one. The fight drained out of him. He looked at me, truly looked at me, and for the first time he didn't see his harmless old mother. He saw the woman who had raised him, outsmarted him, and utterly destroyed him. He took the job. Now every evening I sit in his old leather chair, looking out over the city lights. And every night he arrives, head down, dressed in a janitor's uniform, to empty the trash cans and clean the floors of the empire he built with my money. He avoids my gaze. He's learning the value of a dollar. He's learning the weight of betrayal. And I'm learning that some of life's most satisfying moments come not from spending a fortune, but from making sure the right person pays for it. The first night was the quietest. David moved through the offices like a ghost, his shoulders hunched, his face a rigid mask of humiliation. He avoided eye contact with the other members of the cleaning crew, a trio of cheerful, chatty women who had once been his colleagues. I watched him on the security monitors from the plush silence of my office. He flinched every time the mop bucket clanged. The sight should have filled me with triumph. Instead, it left a hollow, ashy taste in my mouth. This was my son. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike, and I had reduced him to this. But then I'd remember the cold, calculated columns on that spreadsheet, the sheer scale of the theft, the 20 years of lies. The hollow feeling would be replaced by the cold steel of resolve. The lesson was not over. The next evening, I didn't stay in the office. I descended to the main floor just as the day staff was leaving. The employees who had once scurried out of David's path now looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and fear. I smiled warmly. Good night, everyone. Thank you for your hard work today, I said, my voice carrying easily through the open space. A few mumbled replies. Then I walked over to the janitor's closet. David was inside, struggling to knot the strings of a cheap, ill-fitting cleaning apron. He froze when he saw me. Is there a problem, Mrs. Evans? He asked, his voice dripping with a venom he couldn't conceal. Just doing my rounds, David, I said pleasantly. I noticed some scuff marks on the linoleum in the third-floor break room yesterday. I trust you'll give it some extra attention tonight. We must maintain standards. His jaw tightened so hard I could see a muscle twitching. He gave a sharp, jerky nod. And David? I added, just as he turned to grab a mop. The toilets on the executive floor. They require a thorough scrubbing. The kind of hands-on detail work I know you're now capable of. The color drained from his face, leaving two bright spots of fury on his cheeks. That was the reaction I needed. Not the hollow feeling, but the sharp, clean cut of justice. I turned and walked away, leaving him seething in the closet. The following week, the real test began. David's pride, it seemed, was a more powerful motivator than his sense of self-preservation. I discovered he'd been trying to covertly rally the board of directors, the few remaining loyalists he had left, whispering about my instability, my unsuitability to run a tech company. He thought I was just a rich old woman playing a vindictive game. He underestimated me, just as he always had. I called an emergency board meeting. I didn't go in with threats. I went in with a new business plan. For 3 months as Marge, I hadn't just been cleaning. I'd been listening. I knew which projects were bleeding money, which managers were incompetent, which departments were overstaffed with yes men David had hired for their loyalty, not their talent. For an hour, I laid out a ruthless, brilliant restructuring plan. I cited specific waste, named names, presented a new, streamlined operational flowchart. The board, initially hostile, fell into a stunned silence. I wasn't just the majority owner, I understood the business better than their ousted CEO ever had. Any questions? I asked, folding my hands on the polished table. There were none. Good, my first directive. A full external audit of all company finances for the last 5 years. I want every penny accounted for. I looked directly at David, who was sitting in the far corner, pale and silent, having been forced to attend to take notes for the real executives. The janitorial staff will assist in gathering the necessary archived files from storage. See to it, David. The public humiliation was complete. He had been outmaneuvered not by a corporate raider, but by his own mother, the cleaning lady. That night, I found him in the server room, not cleaning, but just sitting on an upturned crate, his head in his hands. He looked up as I entered, and for the first time, I didn't see anger or hatred in his eyes. I saw a bottomless well of shame. Why are you doing this, Mom? He asked, his voice ragged and broken. Just take it all, sell the company, keep the money. Why this torture? I leaned against a server rack, the hum of computers filling the silence. Because, David, you didn't just steal my money, I said, my voice quiet but firm in the cool, dry air. You stole my trust. You stole my security. You treated me like a fool, an inconvenience to be managed and then discarded. You didn't just want my wealth, you wanted my ignorance. This, I gestured around the sterile room, is not about the money, it's about respect. You will learn the value of things you never had to earn. You will learn the weight of the dignity you so easily stripped from me. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. I'm sorry, he whispered. The words were so quiet I almost didn't hear them. They weren't the calculated words of a cornered man. They were the shattered words of a broken son. I know you are, I said, but sorry is a down payment, David, not the full price. I left him there in the humming silence and went back upstairs. The revenge was no longer sweet. It was necessary. It was a surgery, painful and brutal, to cut out the rot of his entitlement. The patient was on the table, and the operation was underway. I didn't know if he would survive it. I didn't know if our relationship would survive it. But for the first time since I found that spreadsheet, I felt a glimmer of something other than cold fury. It was a faint, fragile hope that the man he was becoming in that server room might be someone worth knowing. Someone who finally understood that every single thing in life, from a clean floor to a clear conscience, has a cost. And he was finally beginning to pay his. The silence of the server room lingered with me long after I left David there. The hum of the machines seemed to have seeped into my bones. A constant, low-level reminder of the cold, digital nature of his betrayal and the equally calculated frost of my response. I returned to the CEO's office, my office, but the leather chair felt less like a throne and more like a witness stand. I had won. I had dismantled his pride, exposed his weakness, and seized control of the kingdom he built with stolen bricks. So why did the victory feel so hollow, so drenched in a profound sadness that no amount of vindication could wash away? The next few days were a masterclass in surrealism. The company, Apex Dynamics, began to adapt to its new reality with the grim efficiency of a body accepting a new, foreign organ. The employees, once terrified of me, now watched with a kind of morbid fascination. Whispers followed me in the halls, but they were no longer just about the eccentric old woman who had usurped the tyrant. They were about the new policies I implemented. The cancellation of David's pet projects that were financial black holes, the immediate raises for the underpaid cleaning and maintenance staff, the opening of a transparent channel for whistleblowers to report waste and mismanagement without fear. I was running a corporation, but it felt like I was conducting a grand social experiment. And at the center of it all was my son, the janitor. He did his job with a silent, grim determination that was almost more painful than his initial rage. He avoided me assiduously. If I entered a room, he would find a reason to leave. If our paths crossed in the long, sterile hallway, he would stare at a point somewhere past my left shoulder, his jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. He was a ghost haunting his own life, and I was the exorcist who refused to leave. The breaking point, as they often are, came from an unexpected direction. One evening, about a week after the server room incident, I was working late, reviewing the preliminary findings of the external audit. The numbers were even uglier than I'd imagined. David hadn't just been stealing from me, he'd been creatively cooking the company's books, siphoning funds into offshore accounts, inflating profits to secure loans the company couldn't afford. The depth of the deception was breathtaking. My office door, which I always kept slightly ajar, creaked open a little wider. I looked up, expecting to see one of the night cleaning staff. Instead, it was a young woman, maybe 25 or 26. She had intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses and wore the standard Apex polo shirt, but she looked nervous, clutching a tablet to her chest like a shield. "Mrs. Evans," she said, her voice tentative. "I'm sorry to bother you so late. I'm Chloe from IT. You asked for the archived financial server logs from 2017? Of course, Chloe. Come in," I said, gesturing to the chair opposite my desk. "What did you find?" She didn't sit. Instead, she took a step forward and placed the tablet on my desk. On the screen was not a spreadsheet of server logs, but a security video feed. It showed David's office, late at night. He was at his desk, but he wasn't working. His head was in his hands, and his shoulders were shaking with silent, violent sobs. The timestamp was from 2 nights ago. My breath caught in my throat. I looked from the video to Chloe's anxious face. I was cross-referencing the access logs for the financial server like you asked," she explained hurriedly, "and I found anomalous logins from an unauthorized admin account. I traced the activity and pulled the security footage from the cameras nearest the server's physical location to see who it was. That's that's when I found this clip from a hallway camera. It's on a different server, I thought you should see it." She was lying, not about the video, but about how she found it. She hadn't been casually cross-referencing. She'd been digging, probably out of a sense of justice or maybe just raw curiosity. She had seen something private and devastating, and instead of deleting it, she had brought it to me. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She met my gaze, her nervousness replaced by a sudden, fierce honesty. "Because everyone thinks you're just torturing him. And maybe you are, but I've been here for 3 years. I've seen him fire people for asking questions. I've seen him take credit for other people's work. My friend in accounting says he's been embezzling for years, so part of me thinks he deserves it." She took a deep breath. "But the other part of me? That's a human being. And he's breaking, and I guess I just wanted to know if you knew that, if that was still the point." I stared at the frozen image on the tablet. My son, alone in the dark, utterly shattered. Chloe's words echoed in the quiet room. If that was still the point. What was the point? To see him broken? To reduce him to a sobbing wreck in an empty office? The cold fury that had sustained me for months began to waver, threatened by a tidal wave of maternal grief so powerful it was dizzying. I had wanted him to feel the weight of his actions, to understand the pain he had caused. But watching that video, I realized I might have succeeded too well. I had not just balanced the scales, I had smashed them. "Thank you, Chloe," I said, my voice thick. This was, this was the right thing to do. You have a good heart and a sharp mind. The audit team could use someone with your instincts. Report to Arthur Clemens tomorrow morning. Tell him I sent you." Her eyes widened in shock, then lit up with excitement. "Thank you, Mrs. Evans, thank you." She practically fled the office, leaving me alone with the ghost on the tablet screen. I couldn't bring myself to watch the video. I minimized the window and sat in the deepening twilight, the city lights blinking on outside my window. I was the queen of this glass castle, but it felt emptier than my little house ever had. I made a decision. It was time to talk to David, not as the CEO to the janitor, not as the wronged party to the thief, but as a mother to her son. The conversation couldn't happen here, surrounded by the symbols of his failure and my power. The next evening, I didn't go to the office. I went to his house, the sprawling, cold modernist mansion he had bought with my money. I still had a key, a relic from a time when I would come over to babysit my granddaughter. The house was dark and silent. I let myself in. The interior was a showroom, all sharp angles, expensive art, and furniture that looked too uncomfortable to actually use. It was a house designed for impressing people, not for living in. There was no warmth, no life. I found him in the vast, empty kitchen, sitting at a massive island not unlike the one in his old office. He was still wearing his janitor's uniform, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of him. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "Come to check if I've polished the silver?" he asked, his voice flat and drained of all its former arrogance. "No, David," I said quietly, pulling out a stool and sitting opposite him. "I came to talk. What's left to say? You won, I lost. You own everything. I clean toilets. The lesson is learned. Can we be done now?" He wouldn't look at me, staring into the amber depths of his glass. "Is it?" I asked. "What lesson have you learned, David? Tell me. I truly want to know." He finally looked up, and the raw pain in his eyes was like a physical blow. "I learned that my mother is a ruthless bitch who enjoys humiliating her only son." He spat, the anger flaring for a final, brief moment before sputtering out. He slumped again. "No, that's not true. I learned that I was a ruthless bitch first. I learned that I am a thief and a liar and a fraud. I learned that the man I thought I was never existed. He was just a house of cards built on stolen money, and you didn't just knock it down. You blew on it and it all just fell apart. He took a long swallow of whiskey. Are you happy now? Is that what you wanted to hear? Tears pricked at my eyes. I wanted to hear the truth. And I think for the first time I just did. We sat in silence for a long time. The ice in his glass clinked softly. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered, the words barely audible. I am so sorry for all of it, for the money, for the lies. For making you do this. The dam inside me broke. The cold CEO, the avenging angel, she vanished. I was just his mother, sitting in his dark kitchen, my heart breaking for us both. I'm sorry too, David, I said, my voice cracking. I was so hurt, so angry. I wanted you to feel what I felt, but seeing you like this, it's destroying me too. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and saw the tears streaming down my face. His own eyes welled up. What happens now? He asked, a lost little boy in a man's broken body. Now, I said, taking a deep, shuddering breath, we try to pick up the pieces. Together, the plan I laid out for him that night was not about forgiveness. That would take time, maybe years. It was about atonement. It was about earning. I reinstated him at Apex Dynamics, but not as CEO. He started at the very bottom in the IT department, the same department where Chloe now worked. His salary was entry level. His first project, under Chloe's supervision, was to personally oversee the full, painstaking data recovery and organization for the external audit. He would have to face, line by line, the full extent of his financial betrayal. He would also sell the mansion, the sports cars, every single asset he couldn't account for with his legitimate salary. The money would be returned with interest to my accounts and to the company's coffers. It was a long, hard road. There were days he stumbled, days the old arrogance flickered back to life. But Chloe, to my surprise and immense gratitude, became an unlikely ally. She didn't coddle him. She challenged him, treated him not as a disgraced prince, but as a capable, if flawed, colleague who needed to prove himself. A grudging respect, and perhaps something more, began to grow between them. A year later, Apex Dynamics was a different company. Leaner, more ethical, more profitable. I had stepped back from day-to-day operations, promoting a brilliant, humble woman from the engineering department to CEO. David was now a junior project manager. He lived in a small apartment, rode a bike to work, and was slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding his life and his name. We had dinner every Sunday. The conversations were still sometimes stilted, the wounds still tender, but they were real. On one of those Sundays, he showed up looking nervous. I sold the last of the vintage watches today, he said, pushing an envelope across the table. It was a bank draft for the final installment of his debt. That's the last of it. It's all there. I didn't touch the envelope. I looked at my son. He was thinner, there were lines on his face that hadn't been there before, but his eyes were clear. They held a humility and a strength that his former wealth and power had never given him. I know, I said, I know it is. He took a deep breath. So, what now? I smiled, a real, genuine smile that felt like the sun after a long winter. Now, David, I said, we are finally free to figure out what comes next. Together, the revenge was over. The healing had begun. And I realized, as I watched him help me clear the table, that the greatest justice wasn't in the crushing defeat of an enemy, but in the difficult, painful, and miraculous redemption of a son. The price had been astronomical, paid in a currency of heartbreak and pride. But as I looked at the man he was becoming, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that it had been worth every penny. A year later, the offices of Apex Dynamics felt like a different company. It wasn't just the new logo on the wall or the fresh coat of paint. It was the atmosphere. The tense, fear-poisoned silence that had characterized David's reign was gone. Now, the halls hummed with the sound of actual conversation, not hushed whispers. Laughter was heard, unforced and genuine. I had stepped back from day-to-day operations, taking the role of chairman of the board, and had appointed a new CEO, Sarah Mendoza, a brilliant and steady woman from the engineering department who had been overlooked for years for her refusal to play David's political games. But the real change was measured every Sunday at dinner. David would come to my modest home, the one he'd once deemed beneath us. He arrived on a bicycle, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, not a $5,000 suit. His hands, which had only known the weight of a pen and a keyboard, now had scratches and calluses, small badges of honor from his new, tangible work. That evening, he was kneading pizza dough, focusing intently on the task as flour dusted the countertop. There was a small, content smile on his face. I hadn't seen one like it since he was a boy. The server infrastructure optimization project got approved today, he said, not looking up, fully absorbed in the process. The board approved it unanimously. Chloe, Miss Nolan, says it could save the company 20% on cooling costs. He spoke of Chloe, the girl from IT, with the same professional respect he'd once reserved for industry titans. But there was a note in his voice I hadn't heard before. Not pride, but a quiet, steady confidence. A confidence that came not from a luxury watch on his wrist, but from a job well and truly done. That's wonderful news, David, I replied, slicing tomatoes. I'm proud of you. He paused for a second, his hands stilling in the dough. Those words, I'm proud of you, were a new, unfamiliar language to him. He nodded, swallowing hard. Thanks, Mom. We cooked in a comfortable silence. Before, the quiet between us had been heavy and strained, like a taut wire. Now it was peaceful. Later, as we ate the pizza, he spoke again, more hesitantly this time. Chloe. She asked me to a concert next weekend, the symphony. I put my slice down, this was new. In the entire year, he hadn't dated. He worked, he went home, he saw me. His social life had died with his old ego. And what did you say? I asked, as neutrally as I could. I said I'd think about it, he mumbled, staring at his plate. I don't know, who am I to go to the symphony now? The guy who scrubbed the toilets in his own office? The ghost of that old shame resurfaced in his voice. You are David Evans, I said firmly. A project manager at Apex Dynamics. A man who retrained himself in IT from the ground up. A man who sold his mansion and paid back his debts. A man who deserves to go to a concert with a smart and kind woman, if he wants to. He looked up at me, and the vulnerability he had worked so hard to hide these past months was plain in his eyes. But what if people find out who I was, what I did, she will find out? People already know David, I said softly. The whole city knows, they also see what you're doing now. And as for Chloe, she saw you at your lowest point, and it seems she's still here. That says a great deal. He nodded slowly, processing my words. The fear in his eyes gradually gave way to resolve, the healthy kind that is born not from arrogance but from earned self-worth. Okay, he exhaled, I'll go. Over the next few weeks, I watched a subtle transformation. He bought himself one decent suit with his own salary. He started working out again, not for show, but for himself. He smiled more, and every Sunday he would tell me about his dates with Chloe. The concert, a trip to the museum, simple walks in the park. He spoke of her with a tenderness and respect I'd never heard when he discussed his previous, perfectly coiffed and empty girlfriends. One evening, he came over with a light in his eyes I thought had been extinguished forever. We presented our new cybersecurity plan to the board today, he said, barely through the door. Sarah was impressed. Chloe? She was magnificent. Absolutely fearless. He talked about the presentation for 20 minutes straight, his enthusiasm infectious. And in that moment, I saw it. I saw the man my son was always meant to be. Not a predatory corporate raider, but a passionate, engaged leader. A leader who valued his team, not one who feared it. When he paused for a breath, I put my hand on his. You found yourself, David, I whispered. Your real self, he smiled, and it was the most genuine, easiest smile I had seen in years. I'm starting to think so, Mom. Thank you? You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do, he said, his eyes glistening. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for making me face what I had become. If it weren't for you, I'd still be that hollow, pathetic man in that big house. You didn't just get revenge, Mom. You saved me. My heart constricted. There was no flattery in his words, no sycophancy. Only pure, unadulterated gratitude. That night after he left, I sat in my kitchen and looked at the stars reflected in the window pane. Revenge? Yes, that's how it had started, with a burning, all-consuming rage and a desire to make him pay. But it had transmuted. It had morphed into something greater, atonement, healing. A real, hard-won reconciliation built not on forgetting, but on bitter, difficult memory and overcoming. I was no longer a vengeful, rich widow acting out her hurt. I was a mother who had helped her son be reborn. And the price we had both paid for that second birth. His pride, my peace, 2 years of grueling work, felt like the most valuable transaction of our lives. Justice, I realized, was not a final chord, a period at the end of a sentence. It was a quiet, continuous melody that now played in our shared Sunday dinners, in his firm handshake, in his happy eyes. And it was the sweetest melody I had ever heard. The ledger was not just balanced. It was closed, and a new, better book had been opened. We were finally free. The melody of our new life played on for months, a harmonious composition I had never dared to hope for. David thrived. His promotion to senior project manager wasn't a handout from me, or a wary board. It was earned, a direct result of his team's performance and his own rediscovered aptitude for genuine leadership. He and Chloe became a steady, solid unit. Their relationship, forged in the crucible of his downfall, was built on a foundation of disarming honesty that his previous life had never allowed. I watched them one Sunday afternoon in my garden, replanting a rose bush that had struggled for years. David was digging, his muscles straining with an effort that was now natural to him, while Chloe held the new plant, her instructions clear and patient. They worked together seamlessly, a quiet partnership. There was no performance, no need to impress. They were just two people building something together. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Later, as we drank lemonade on the porch, Chloe turned to me, her expression turning serious. Eleanor, she began, using my first name now, a sign of the closeness we'd developed. I've been doing a deep dive into the old, archived servers, the ones from before the audit. Standard security maintenance. I nodded, a faint prickle of unease brushing my neck. The past was a closed book, one I had no desire to reopen. I found something, she continued, her voice dropping slightly. It's not about the money. It's correspondence between David and a shell corporation called Perseus Holdings. Dates back to just before he started. Well, before he started taking from you. David put his glass down, his face clouding with confusion. Perseus, I remember the name, vaguely, some potential investor who went radio silent. Why? Chloe took a deep breath. Because they weren't an investor, David. They were a predator, the emails. They're masterpieces of psychological manipulation. They spent months grooming you, flattering your ego, affirming your vision, subtly convincing you that your caution, Eleanor's caution, was holding you back. They painted her as an old-fashioned, risk-averse millstone around the neck of your ambition. The warmth of the afternoon sun suddenly felt cold. I saw the pieces click into place in David's mind, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. They made it sound like it was all my idea, he whispered, the color draining from his face. The aggressive expansion, the leveraging of assets, they made me feel like a genius for considering it. They knew everything about our financial structure, Mom. Everything. They knew which buttons to push. The initial transfers, Chloe said gently, the ones that started it all. They were presented to you as short-term, high-yield loans to Perseus to cover a liquidity gap, right? With promises of massive returns. David could only nod, looking physically ill. I thought I was being a brilliant strategist. Beating the system, I was so arrogant. I didn't see I was being played. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and complex. For years, I had believed my son's betrayal was born purely of his own greed and arrogance. Now, I was being shown a different picture. A carefully laid trap with my son as the proud, vain prey. He was still guilty. He had still taken the bait, had still chosen to steal and lie. But the sin felt different now. It was less a calculated evil and more a catastrophic folly, expertly engineered. I looked at my son, seeing not just the remorseful man he had become, but the proud, insecure boy he had been, so easily flattered and misled. The last remnants of my cold, righteous anger, the bedrock of my revenge, finally crumbled away, leaving only a profound, aching sorrow for us both. Mom, David's voice was choked. All this time, I thought it was all me. My fault, my greed, and it was. But it wasn't just me, I was so blind. I reached across the small table and took his hand. We both were, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I was so blinded by the hurt, by the betrayal, that I only saw a monster. I never looked for the trap. The three of us sat in silence, the truth settling around us. It didn't erase the past. The money was still stolen, the trust still broken. But it reframed it. David's failure was not that of a master villain, but of a tragically flawed man who had been expertly manipulated. What do we do with this? David asked finally, looking from me to Chloe. We find them, I said, my voice quiet but steely. The CEO, the strategist, was back, but her purpose had transformed. This was no longer about revenge against my son. It was about justice against the true architects of our misery. Chloe, can you trace them? Chloe's eyes lit with a fierce, determined light. I've already started. They're good. They've layered their digital footprint through a dozen offshore havens, but nobody is perfect. Everyone leaves a trace, it's just a matter of time. And so, a new chapter began. Not one of public humiliation and scorched earth revenge, but a silent, meticulous hunt. Chloe, with her brilliant, forensic mind, led the charge from her new position as head of cybersecurity. David, armed with his intimate, painful knowledge of the correspondence, worked alongside her, redeeming his skills for a cause that was finally pure. I provided the resources, the quiet influence, the strategic patience they needed. It took months. There were dead ends, false leads, and complex digital decoys, but we were relentless. We were no longer a fractured family, but a unified trio, bound by a shared purpose that was greater than any of us. Finally, the breakthrough came. A tiny slip, a server log in Iceland that didn't match the pattern, a name on a leasing agreement for a virtual office that Chloe cross-referenced with a flight manifest. The man behind Perseus Holdings wasn't a shadowy international syndicate. He was a man we knew, Arthur Lemme, David's former mentor, the man who had taken him under his wing in his first job out of college. The man who had always been so impressed with David's potential, who had subtly, expertly stoked the flames of his ambition and resentment for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He had used David as a key to unlock my fortune, a fortune he had apparently been aware of long before David's theft began. The night we confirmed it, we sat in my living room, the evidence laid out on the coffee table. David was pale, shaken to his core. The betrayal was now complete, a circle of deceit that had ensnared us all. What now? David asked, his voice hollow. Do we go to the police? The SEC? I looked at the face of Arthur Lemme on the screen, a kindly, grandfatherly face that hid a soul of pure avarice. A public trial would drag our names through the mud again. It would reopen every healed wound for a conviction that might, given his layers of protection, never stick. No, I said, a new, calm certainty filling me. We don't. I picked up my phone and dialed a number from memory. Arthur Lemme answered on the second ring, his voice as warm and avuncular as ever. Eleanor, what a pleasant surprise. To what do I owe the honor? Hello, Arthur, I said, my voice perfectly even. I believe you're familiar with the work of Perseus Holdings? Yes, I thought you might be. Here's what's going to happen. You will wire every cent you stole from my accounts and manipulated from Apex Dynamics, plus a 40% penalty for your trouble, to the following charitable trust by 5 p.m. tomorrow. The details are being emailed to you now. There was a long, dead silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear his brain scrambling. I, I have no idea what you're talking about, Eleanor. This is slanderous. Arthur, I interrupted, my voice dropping to a whisper that was all the more lethal for its calm. We have the server logs from Reykjavik. We have the lease for your virtual office in Singapore. We have the flight records to Zurich. We have it all. You have 24 hours. If the money isn't there, every single byte of this data goes to the SEC, the FBI, and the Wall Street Journal. Not anonymously, with a full signed affidavit from me, my son, and my future daughter-in-law. The silence that followed was absolute. I had just offered him a choice: utter financial ruin and lifelong humiliation, or a painful but private financial amputation. He chose the amputation. The money arrived with 2 hours to spare. We didn't celebrate. We sat together, watching the confirmation email appear, and felt a final, quiet closure. The last ghost of the past had been laid to rest. Later that week, David and Chloe came over for dinner. We didn't talk about Arthur Lemme or Perseus Holdings. We talked about the future, about their future. David looked at me across the table, his eyes clear and steady. Mom, he said, Chloe and I, we're getting married. The joy that surged through me was so pure and so powerful it stole my breath. I looked at them, at the love and certainty shining in their faces, and I knew that our long, painful journey had finally, truly brought us home. The revenge I had once craved was a barren wasteland. The justice we had just exacted was a surgical procedure. But this was a harvest. It was the beautiful, life-giving fruit that had grown from the scorched earth of our past. I reached out and took their hands in mine. It's perfect, I said, my heart so full it could barely contain the happiness. And it was. The wedding was a small, sun-drenched affair in my backyard, a world away from the lavish, performative spectacle David would have once insisted upon. There were no ice sculptures or string quartets. There was just the rustling of old oak trees, the scent of roses from the garden we'd revitalized together, and the faces of the people who mattered. Sarah Mendoza, his unassuming CEO, stood as his best woman. A few of his colleagues from IT, who had become genuine friends, cheered as he, with trembling hands, placed a simple band on Chloe's finger. His vows weren't grand promises. They were quiet, specific, and heartfelt. He promised to always listen, to never let pride build a wall between them, and to remember the man he had become in the process of getting lost and found. I gave him away. It wasn't a traditional choice, but it felt like the only one. I was handing over the man he was now to the woman who had helped him solidify that person. As I placed his hand in hers, I didn't feel a loss. I felt a completion. After the toasts were made and the cake was cut, David found me watching them from the porch step. He sat beside me, the knees of his new suit pants brushing the grass. "Thank you, Mom," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "For everything, even the terrible parts." "Especially the terrible parts," I corrected gently, bumping my shoulder against his. "They brought us here." He nodded, looking out at Chloe, who was laughing with a group of her friends. "I was thinking about the foundation, the Second Chance Fund. It's a good name, but it's not enough." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, it's reactive," he said, and I heard the old strategic mind at work, now honed to a finer, wiser point. "We help people after they've already been cheated, after they've hit rock bottom. That's important, but what about before? Arthur, he found me because I was arrogant and insecure and I felt entitled to more. He saw a perfect mark. How many other Davids are out there right now, being groomed by their own Arthurs?" The question hung in the air, weighty and profound. It was the next logical step, the evolution of our mission from justice to prevention. "What are you proposing?" I asked. "An academy," he said, the idea clearly having been brewing for some time. "A nonprofit affiliated with the foundation. We don't just give money to victims. We teach people how not to become victims. We teach financial literacy, not just as math, but as ethics. We teach them to recognize psychological manipulation in business. We bring in speakers, former fraudsters, FBI agents, psychologists, to show them how the traps are built, so they can see them coming." I looked at my son, this man who had been to the darkest depths of his own character and had clawed his way back. He wasn't just offering charity, he was offering his own shame, his own failure as the primary textbook. It was the most courageous thing I had ever heard. "It's brilliant, David," I said, my heart swelling with a pride so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. "It's perfect." The Second Chance Academy opened its doors 6 months later. We didn't rent a sleek office in a skyscraper. We bought an old, abandoned library in a struggling part of the city and renovated it. David insisted on it. He said knowledge was the best defense, and it should be accessible to everyone, not just those who could afford a downtown address. The opening day was a cacophony of hope. Students of all ages milled about, young entrepreneurs, retirees worried about their savings, small business owners. David taught the first class himself. He stood at the front of the room, no PowerPoint, no flashy presentation. Just him, a whiteboard, and his story. "My name is David Evans," he began, his voice clear and steady, though I saw his knuckles whiten as he gripped the marker. "And a few years ago, I lost everything because I was arrogant, ignorant, and desperately wanted to be seen as a success. I was manipulated into betraying the person who loved me most in this world. I am not here as an expert who has all the answers. I am here as a cautionary tale who learned the questions the hard way." I watched from the back of the room, my hand tucked in Chloe's arm. We watched him hold the room spellbound, not with boasts, but with brutal, disarming honesty. He laid his own folly bare, dissecting the flattery, the false promises, and the gradual erosion of his ethics with the precision of a surgeon. He was taking the weapon of his past and dismantling it in front of them, showing them every dangerous component. Afterward, a young man in a cheap suit approached him, looking nervous. "Mr. Evans, that thing you said about the too good to be true return rates, I think my uncle might be involved in something like that. Can I talk to you about it?" David placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Of course, let's grab a coffee. That's what I'm here for." As I watched him lead the young man away, I knew this was his true redemption. Not the returned money, not the successful marriage, not even the foundation. It was this: taking the worst thing he had ever done and alchemizing it into a shield for others. He was building something good and strong and lasting from the rubble of his greatest failure. I walked out of the old library into the afternoon sun. The past was no longer a ghost that haunted us. It was a foundation, solid and settled beneath our feet. The revenge I had once orchestrated was a tiny, bitter footnote in a much larger, sweeter story. The story of a family that had fallen into the abyss, and instead of dying there, had learned to fly. The balance sheet of my heart was not just in the black, it was overflowing, paying dividends of a peace I had never thought possible. Our justice had finally, and completely, become our joy. The success of the Second Chance Academy was a quiet, steady burn, not a flashy explosion. It didn't make headlines, but it changed lives in the cramped classrooms of the old library. David found his true calling not in boardrooms, but in those moments of connection. The dawning horror on a retiree's face as he recognized a scam tactic, the relieved sigh of a young couple who just learned how to spot predatory loan terms. He was using the very tools of his own deception to build fortresses for others. One afternoon, a young man named Alexei lingered after a seminar on investment fraud. He was maybe 19, dressed in a hoodie that looked too thin for the cooling weather, his eyes darting around the room with a nervous energy. "Mr. Evans," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That thing you said about them making you feel smart, like you're in on a secret no one else gets." David nodded, leaning against a desk. "Yeah, that's their favorite trick. Makes you feel special so you don't question the logic." Alexei swallowed hard. "My older brother, Mikkel, he's got this thing, a crypto thing. He says it's a sure thing, that he's got a guy on the inside giving him signals. He's putting all his money in, my mom's savings, even. He says I'm just a kid, that I don't get it." His words tumbled out in a rush of fear and frustration. "But it sounds like what you described." David's posture shifted immediately, the relaxed instructor replaced by the focused protector. "Tell me about the guy, the one on the inside." As Alexei haltingly described the exclusive Telegram channel and the guaranteed returns, I saw David's face tighten. It was a different flavor of the same poison Arthur had fed him, digitized, modernized, but built on the same foundation of flattery and exclusivity. Can you talk to him?" Alexei pleaded. "He won't listen to me. He thinks I'm stupid." David looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. This wasn't in the Academy's official mandate. This was personal, messy, and potentially dangerous. "We don't confront the brother," I said, joining them. My voice was calm, the voice of a strategist. "That will only make him dig in his heels. He'll see us as the enemy trying to keep him from his fortune. We go after the source." "Alexei, do you have access to this Telegram channel?" He nodded, pulling out a cracked smartphone. "Good," I said. "David, get Chloe." An hour later, the four of us were huddled in the Academy's small back office, the glow of computer screens illuminating our faces. Chloe's fingers flew across her keyboard, her expression a mask of intense concentration. "It's a classic pump and dump scheme wrapped in crypto jargon," she murmured, tracing digital pathways on her screen. "The guy on the inside is a bot. The signals are just algorithms designed to create artificial urgency. They'll pull the rug out when the price is artificially high, and everyone like Mikkel will be left holding worthless digital tokens." Alexei looked terrified. "He's going to lose everything." "Not if we can help it," David said, his voice firm. He turned to Chloe. "Can we trace the wallet, the one that's going to cash out?" Chloe grinned, a fierce, predatory smile. "I can do better than that. I can set a digital trap. We can't stop the scheme, but we can make it very, very painful for the people running it." The plan was audacious. Using Alexei's access, Chloe infiltrated the Telegram channel not as a skeptic, but as a true believer, a wealthy, naive investor eager to get in on the ground floor. She fed them just enough information to make her credible. Meanwhile, David worked with Alexei, coaching him on how to slowly, carefully plant seeds of doubt in his brother's mind, not by arguing, but by asking questions. How does the insider profit if he's giving the signals away for free? What happens if the app goes down right when we need to sell? It was a delicate operation, a psychological and digital siege. I provided the capital for Chloe's investment. A few $100,000 I was perfectly willing to lose if it meant exposing the criminals and saving a family. The day of the rug pull arrived. The channel was frenzied with excitement, the price of the obscure cryptocurrency skyrocketing based on pure manipulation. Mikkel was ecstatic, ready to become a millionaire. And then, Chloe sprang her trap. Seconds before the schemers were set to dump their holdings and crash the price, she executed a series of complex, pre-programmed trades. Using our bait money, she created a massive, instantaneous sell wall that crashed the price prematurely. The schemers' own bots, programmed to sell at the peak, were triggered into a panic sell-off, causing a death spiral that evaporated the currency's value in minutes. But Chloe wasn't done. She had embedded a tracing program in our investment. As the schemers scrambled to move their now diminished profits, her program latched on, following the digital money trail through a maze of wallets, unmasking the real-world identities behind the bots. We didn't go to the police. We sent the entire package, the identities, the transaction histories, the recorded Telegram chats, to every major financial regulatory body in the world. The fallout was swift and public. The headlines screamed about a major international crypto scam being dismantled. Mikkel lost nothing because he had, thanks to Alexei's gentle nudging and the sudden, shocking crash, gotten cold feet at the last second and pulled his money out. He showed up at the academy the next day, pale and shaken, his brother at his side. He didn't thank us. He was too humiliated for that. But he looked at David, and the fanatical gleam was gone from his eyes, replaced by a dazed, sober understanding. It felt so real, he whispered. I know, David said, his voice filled with a deep empathy that could only come from firsthand experience. It always does. After they left, David, Chloe, and I stood together in the empty classroom, the adrenaline of the past week slowly ebbing away. We're not just an academy anymore, are we? David said, looking out at the city skyline. No, I replied. We're something else. We had become a quiet guardian, a small, fierce force that used the hard-won knowledge of the dark side of human nature to protect those who were about to walk into the shadows. The Second Chance Academy was our public face, our mission of prevention. But this new, unnamed initiative, our digital and psychological intervention team, was our sharp, hidden talent. The revenge I had once wrought on my son had been about balancing a ledger. The justice we were enacting now was about safeguarding the ledgers of others. The circle was complete. The victim had become the avenger, and then, finally, the protector. And as I stood between my son and the woman he loved, I knew that our story, born in betrayal and forged in fire, had finally found its happiest ending, a never-ending purpose. The quiet purpose that had settled over our lives after the crypto operation was a new kind of normal. The Second Chance Academy thrived, its reputation growing not through marketing, but through the quiet, grateful whispers of those it had helped. David, Chloe, and I had settled into a rhythm. A trio of guardians watching over a flock we knew was perpetually in danger from wolves we understood all too well. The call, when it came, was not from a panicked victim, but from a lawyer. His voice was crisp, professional, and utterly cold. Mrs. Eleanor Evans. This is Robert Vance of Vance, Sterling, and Colt. I represent the interests of the Lemay estate. The name hit me like a physical blow. Arthur Lemay, the architect of our misery, was dead. The news should have brought closure, a final period at the end of a painful sentence. But the tone of the lawyer's voice suggested not an ending, but a new beginning, a hostile one. The estate? I managed to say, my mind racing. I wasn't aware Arthur had any family. He'd always presented himself as a lonely, avuncular figure. My client is his niece, Miss Alara Vance, the lawyer replied. She has recently come into her inheritance and is conducting a full review of her uncle's affairs. She has questions regarding several substantial financial transactions made from his accounts to a charitable trust under your control in the months preceding his death. My blood ran cold. He was describing the money Arthur had returned under our duress. The penalty, the blood money we had funneled into the foundation. Those transactions were the settlement of a private dispute, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. The matter is closed. My client does not consider it closed, Vance replied, his tone implying a smile. The documentation appears irregular. She is considering petitioning the courts to have those funds returned to the estate pending a full investigation. She believes her uncle was coerced at a time when he may not have been of sound mind. The threat was elegantly veiled but crystal clear. Alara Vance wasn't interested in the truth, she was interested in the money. And she was willing to drag our names, our foundation, through the mud to get it. A public court case, even a baseless one, would be catastrophic. The headlines would be brutal. Disgraced CEO's mother accused of extorting dying man. The trust we'd painstakingly built would evaporate. I called David and Chloe into my study immediately. When I relayed the lawyer's words, David's face went ashen. He's dead and he's still torturing us, he whispered, sinking into a chair. This niece, I never even knew she existed. She probably didn't until she saw a chance to get rich, Chloe said, her fingers already tapping on her laptop. Let's see who Alara Vance is. An hour of digital digging painted a picture. Alara Vance was a minor socialite from a faded aristocratic European family. She was deeply in debt, her name attached to a string of failed boutique businesses, and a lifestyle her inheritance couldn't possibly support. She was desperate. And a desperate person with a claim to a fortune was infinitely more dangerous than a principled one. She's a vulture, David spat. She smells blood in the water. We can't fight this in court, I said, the old, cold strategist in me taking over. Even if we win, we lose. The scandal would destroy the academy. So what do? David asked, the helplessness in his voice tearing at me. We do what Arthur would have done, I said, a dangerous idea forming. We don't play defense, we play offense. We don't wait for her to petition the courts, we go to her. Alara Vance agreed to a meeting at a neutral location, a private club so exclusive it was practically silent. She was everything her picture suggested. Impeccably dressed, sharply beautiful, with eyes as cold and calculating as her uncle's. "Mrs. Evans," she said, not offering her hand, "I must say I'm intrigued. You don't seem like the monster my uncle described in his journals." The bait was obvious. I didn't take it. "Your uncle was a criminal and a manipulator, Miss Vance. The money he transferred was restitution, obtained under legal threat from my lawyers for funds he had stolen. The documentation is all there. You are welcome to review it with your counsel." She smiled, a thin, bloodless expression. "My uncle was a sick, confused old man at the end. Your lawyers preyed on him. It's unseemly." I leaned forward, my voice dropping. "Let's not pretend this is about family honor, Alara. May I call you Alara? This is about money. You see a pot of gold and you want it. The problem is, it's not your gold, and trying to take it will cost you more than you can possibly imagine." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes flickered with annoyance. "Is that a threat?" "It's a lesson in cost-benefit analysis," I said. "You are considering a lawsuit that you will likely lose, but in the process, you will force me to defend myself. And I will do so thoroughly." I nodded to Chloe, who placed a single, slim folder on the table. "This is a summary," I continued. "A preview of what becomes public record the moment you file your first motion. It details your own precarious financial situation, the debts, the lawsuits from your former business partners in Milan, the rather generous allowance your uncle was paying you to stay out of his life and away from his business. An allowance that, I note, stopped shortly before his death, prompting your sudden interest in his affairs." Alara's composure cracked. The color drained from her face. "How did you—" "We know everything, Alara," David said, speaking for the first time. His voice was calm, firm, devoid of the anger I felt simmering beneath the surface. "We know about the forged signatures your uncle used to secure loans in your name to cover your debts. We know you're not just a grieving niece. You're his accomplice. You knew the source of his money. You just didn't care as long as your allowance kept coming." Chloe tapped the folder. "Filing your lawsuit doesn't just risk you losing. It guarantees that all of this becomes front-page news. Your reputation, what's left of it, will be annihilated. You will be unemployable, unbankable, and socially radioactive. Is a potential, and I stress potential, fraction of your uncle's return money worth that?" Alara Vance looked from me to David to Chloe, her arrogant F a cedilla, a D, E Chinese letter shattered. She wasn't facing a grieving old woman. She was facing a unified front, a family that had been tempered in fire and knew how to fight with ruthless precision. We weren't threatening her with violence. We were threatening her with the truth. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice defeated. "We want you to sign this," I said, sliding a document across the table. It was a legally binding agreement. In it, she renounced all claims to the funds in question and agreed to never speak publicly about Arthur Lemme, his business, or our family again. "And in return?" she asked, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Perhaps a payoff." "In return," I said, my voice ice cold, "we don't destroy you. That is your only return, your anonymity and your freedom. Take it or leave it." She read the document, her hands trembling slightly. She looked up, and for a moment, I saw the ghost of her uncle's cunning in her eyes, desperately seeking a way out. Finding none, she picked up the pen. The scratch of her signature was the only sound in the room. Without another word, she stood and left, her heels clicking a frantic, retreating rhythm on the polished marble floor. We sat in silence for a long moment. The threat was neutralized. The foundation was safe. David let out a long, shaky breath. "It never ends, does it? The ghosts of his mistakes, they just keep coming." "No," I said, looking at my son, at the strong, weary man he had become. "But neither do we. We face them together, and we send them back." The war for our peace was a perpetual one. But as we walked out of the club into the sunlight, a united front, I knew we had the one weapon our enemies always underestimated. We had already survived the worst, and we had nothing left to fear.